Overall, 2024 was quite an interesting year, as it might have been smaller in terms of releases and overall big budget titles, but I don't know if I would say I preferred 2023 over 2024, especially considering we got Final Fantasy VII Rebirth this year.
For me, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is one of the crown jewels of the year, and what's so great about it is that it also came out at the start, so it was just a really good way to start off 2024 for me.
No, absolutely. And, I was really fortunate to be someone who got to review the game. So I got my code pretty early on, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I had a long time to experience it and keep zip tight about it. But it was the perfect way to kind of kick off the year, especially. I know I played Grand Blue Fantasy Relink in January, but I was really kind of the appetizer for Rebirth. But that game was pretty fun in its own right.
Yeah, like there's still a couple games before that. Didn't Infinite Wealth come out like literally like a couple weeks before? So like, it seems like the beginning of the year, and then like the end of 2023 was just like RPG, RPG, RPG.
Yeah, it was a really tough time to be an RPG fan. I kind of speaking from personal experience a little bit there.
Like, I haven't even finished Grand Blue Relink yet.
Yeah, this kind of time period around the holidays right now, I'm kind of working through all the games this year that I didn't get a chance to play, so that's been fun. I just gotta beat the Silent Hill 2 remake, which was fun. But I digress. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, undoubtedly, I think my personal game of the year as well as yours, and I think there's just so much to unpack here, despite, the awards and all that stuff, because at the end of the day, a jury can say one thing, but what really matters is, you and what your game of the year is personally. And I think ours is undoubtedly Rebirth.
Yeah, like everyone's gonna have their own personal favorite. Like I even have a couple underdog favorites of the year. Like Romancing Saga 2 remake. That game was amazing. But Rebirth. Like everyone has their personal favorite. I mean, but I already loved Remake, and I think just Rebirth tops it in every conceivable way.
Absolutely. And, kind of jumping into the overall discussion I think we're having here, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I would argue was my most anticipated title ever. And that's kind of crazy to say, but I think back over the years and how excited I was for Remake, and the fact that that game not only met my expectations, but over delivered them and just blew me out of the water. So it kind of set me up for Rebirth, like, how are they going to top this? And they did. And it's so much better than Remake in ways I never thought possible. And I just kind of sit back and I'm like, we've got one game left, and my gosh, like, that's going to shatter the glass ceiling too.
They've just been raising my expectations each time, and I fully expect Part 3 to deliver. Because Rebirth's I already thought Remake, I wouldn't say I thought it was like perfect. Couple qualms, but it's like, I didn't expect Rebirth to just double down. Like, and I'm like, there's no way they're not going to do that for Part 3.
Yeah, no, part 3 is going to be just, I mean, I don't even have words to describe how that game is going to be. It's going to be magical. But even Rebirth, I mean, I felt the same way about Rebirth, and I still do. I poured over 350 hours into the game over this year. I platinumed it, went through all that, and that was, a journey. But I just can't help but find myself still thinking about this game every single day. And, that's fueled by my love for Final Fantasy VII, the story, the characters, the music, and everything, all that. But at the same time, Rebirth is a new experience in a way, in addition to being a familiar one. And I think that's just what makes it so great. And that really starts with the story.
Yeah, like Remake and Rebirth for me have redefined what a remake project can be. I think it should be the gold standard. And all that starts with the core story of the original game, which is still here and preserved.
Right. And, that's one of the things that they said, they being the developers, said right coming out of the gate with this project was, we want to respect the source material and build on it. But really, I think people after the end of Remake had this idea, and I don't fault them. I think that it's understandable to conceive the end of Remake as, the unknown journey. We're pushing into the unknown. It's completely new territory. I get that. But if you look at what the developers have said ever since this project was announced in 2015, and especially after Remake with, hey, there's new stuff, what is going on? They've always said our goal is to elevate the source material. And that's exactly what Rebirth did. There's plenty, and I mean plenty, of new content. I mean, Gingaga Chapter 9. I'd sit here and talk for 6 hours about it. I love that chapter so much. But at the same time, these new additions only build on this overarching story, and we're connecting all these different bits and pieces of the compilation. And that just wasn't possible back in the day when Final Fantasy VII was, the only thing that existed in the FF7 universe, right? And years later, we got Crisis Core, we got Dirge of Cerberus, we got Advent Children before Crisis, we've gotten light novels, there's so much going on. And to be able to bring all that in this project, and on top of that, bring in new themes, characters, locations, and everything else, you truly create what I believe is just the ultimate Final Fantasy experience.
This truly is like a PS1 RPG in terms of density, text, like innovative new ideas. Like, okay, I know I'm saying like a lot, but this whole pack, it's just such a complete package that you just don't really get with a bunch of RPGs, especially on this bit of a higher end, because stuff like that's just hard to craft.
Right.
But they did it. They did it. Like, there's so much new story. They've expanded on familiar scenes and even like new stuff. Chapter 9, once again, it just naturally incorporates everything that has happened in FF7 since FF7.
Yeah, and I think what I was easily most impressed by is obviously, Remake took around the first 5-ish hours of the original game, turned it into a 35-hour experience, and managed to keep this really well-paced story overall for the most part. And I think a lot of people, including myself, to be honest, were curious how the development team was going to attack what a lot of people consider kind of the most linear and monotonous kind of area of Final Fantasy VII, right? Because in the original game, you just kind of go from point A to point B, right? And it's like, okay, that's great. It was amazing and incredible at the time. But I think in the modern day, it's like, hey, how do we keep this engaging and interesting of, hey, you're following these black robes and you're trying to find Sephiroth. How can we keep it engaging as you move from one location to the next without it seeming just like, hey, I'm moving from one location to the next, to the next, to the next. And they did such a great job at interweaving everything and just making this phenomenal adventure. And that story being the mid part of a trilogy is really challenging, but I really do think I agree with what Hamaguchi and the team have said, that Rebirth at the end of the day will probably be looked upon as the favorite by a lot of people once part 3 is out, just for everything it did in expanding and opening up in the world. And this story obviously takes place right from the escape from Midgar all the way to the end of disc 1, which is a lot of ground to cover, but I just think they did it so well and were able to convey everything that needed to be said, while at the same time, balancing the original and bringing new things to light to elevate the next part as well.
Much like how you talked about how good Chapter 9 is, for reasons that we'll dig a bit deeper into in a bit, for me, that's the chapter in Cosmo Canyon. Like, the expansion that they did for the Gi, just, like, it was cliff notes in the original FF7 compared to what Rebirth did. This expansion that they've been doing has for real deepened this lore so much more, and these characters.
Absolutely. And obviously it's done a number on us, as we have a whole video series you're listening to right now about, the remake project and everything with FF7. And, I will say, the characters, just incredible elevation across the board. Everyone, from even the smallest moments that were somewhat implied in the original game have now been brought up as main plot points. And, I think really being able to tell this overall narrative while also building each of these characters up in the midpoint of this trilogy is seriously impressive. And, on the story, the most impressive thing to me is the themes that they're elevating and what they did with the ending.
The ending, these are always the more contentious points of like these most recent Square games. You heard so much about Remake, and Rebirth just redefines it and almost kind of sets expectations for what's to come. It's just so cleverly done.
Absolutely. And not to like really dive into super heavy spoiler territory, but if you're listening to this, chances are you probably beat the game, so we're going to assume that. But, both of our takeaways at the end of the game was, wow, we're focusing on grief and how someone accepts loss, and we're elevating that in part 3 and showcasing this moment, Aerith's scene at the very end of the game as basically just the catalyst for all of this. And I was blown away. I sat on it as, at the time during the review period, not able to speak to anyone about it. And I sat on it for weeks just thinking, I literally cannot believe what they've done, but this has elevated what I thought of the original game and where it happened. And, the game comes out and a lot of people had different opinions, which of course was the intent, right? The whole point, let's provoke discussion, as the developers have said countless times. But I think the really interesting thing for me is, my interpretation, your interpretation, that's slowly been spreading, I would say. I think more and more people are realizing that the worlds are not what they may seem. And, we've done videos on this. We have like basically 2 hours talking about the ending of the game. I'm sure we'll have more next year. But I still think about that every day, about how incredible that was for them to take that risk, knowing what they were doing and how much payoff it's going to have in part 3. Because wow, I mean, that game, the story overall is just going to be, in my opinion, elevated to further heights because of that.
And what's so beautiful about this game in particular at the end of the day is how it just all ties right back into the characters. Like, the changes they did make to the ending segment of this game to the original, it gives you more insight into Cloud as a character. So just every facet of this game's story is using this chance for what you said. Like, this is a super linear part in the original game, going from point A to point B, but they turn this more into like a journey, this unknown journey that Remake teased, and you're learning more and more about these characters at every stop.
Right on. And I think it's, again, Cloud is the most obvious candidate, right? In Remake, he's all closed off. He's not this, don't quote me, I'm just saying online, people call him emo Cloud, right? He's not. But you think about like how he was and how he acted, especially like his body language in Remake, and then you look at Rebirth, and slowly as he experiences these different things and locations and events with Tifa and Aerith and Barrett and Red 13, and then later on, Yuffie, Kate Sith, like you see him slowly open up. And like I think really, so the funny moments at the beginning of the game, like Tifa and Aerith messing with him and being like, oh, Chocobo, can we have one? And he's like all flustered. Then obviously Costa del Sol, and then you get to, I really want to say like chapter 8, right, at the Gold Saucer, and it's like that scene where he's with Dio and he's like has this big smile on his face, and I'm just like, you just really visually see the character development and growth of Cloud in this game. And of course that's with every character. I mean, oh my gosh, there's so many hours of cutscenes and conversations and just character development overall across the board. And I really have almost never experienced anything like it in many games. I mean, it's incredible. And I really do hope that other people in the industry take note of how the Remake team was able to kind of build these characters across multiple games, but at the same time in this, middle of a trilogy were able to grow each of the characters so much into having their own like mini arcs, right?
Like, every new location on this journey is a new chance for these characters to be explored. And they all have something to say at every event. You see their interpersonal relationships just blossom. You see them change and rely on each other in ways that you just didn't in the original.
No, absolutely. And, you know, you think about events like, even in the gameplay, the synergy stuff. I mean, it's like the characters will get into a fight and you'll see them high five or something. You just see the morale grow as the game goes on. And it's like, you know, as cheesy as it sounds, it's like, you know, there begins to be a deeper connection than just, you know, comrades that forms as the game goes on. And you really see that. And I think just, you know, obviously the plethora of side content that through the quests and the mini games and just all the stuff and the different ways the characters interact really helped sell that and bring that even further to the surface. But really, I mean, just an incredible job at not only developing the main character, but developing 7 entire characters and setting up 2 more for the next game.
Like, there's just a big trickle-down effect from the story and characters even into the gameplay. Like you said, with like the synergy attacks. And they RPGify it. You get points that you can then funnel back into these synergy attacks, which gives you even more reason to use different characters just because of the unique animations. It just feels like you're building a team on a personal level.
Yeah, and I think that that really helps people form that, again, with the personal connection. You know, you're really forming something with the characters as you play. You know, not only experiencing, you know, the story and their growth, but I feel like you definitely get a certain level of attachment through that as well. And, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, the main characters, the main party, but I even would argue that that trickles down to the side characters as well. You know, I think one of the ones that definitely stood out to me is Mr. Ultimate Party Animal, right? The Shinra middle manager. I mean, they brought back almost every side character from Remake, but I really love to talk about the Shinra middle manager because it's like, you know, when we first see him, he's on the train with Tifa. She's like, I don't care that you're with Shinra, get out of here. You see that moment, whatever. And then in this game, he's like, you know, he remembers you. He's like, oh, what's up? I'm the ultimate party animal. And you kind of see his story and like stuff with his wife and everything. And it's this one little side character that appeared just for a little bit in the previous game is getting character growth. And obviously, you know, Johnny and all these characters. I mean, you could go on and on.
Johnny gets a lot.
You could go on and on. Even
He's
Chadley.
tied to the hardest trophy in the game.
Yeah, don't. Let's not talk about that one.
Even the, like, you know, Three Stooges, like Butch and all those guys come back for their own side, like the bigger side quest in the game. They're the first, like, relic quest. Even stuff like that comes back. You see growth of these main characters where you get all the drama and character interaction you want. But it's a nice feeling to see even the small guys get incorporation.
Yeah, and you know, I think that right there is what really helps sell the world being alive, right? It's that connection aspect with these characters, seeing not only our main cast, but these random characters that, you know, we interacted with for maybe 5 to 10 minutes in the first game come back and you're like, hey, wait, this character's doing this now. Like, wow, like you really feel like you're there in Gaia. And I think that's so amazing because I didn't feel that with any other game this year. And there were a lot of great games in 2024 that had a high level of immersion, but there just wasn't anything like this.
Even new side characters, like the innkeeper from Calm, if you just keep doing side content, you learn, like, his connection with Soldier, and that deepens Cloud's worries and everything, too. So just even small stuff that not even all players will see, just tighten this narrative and flesh everything out.
I totally agree. And, you know, while we're on characters, I have to mention the people who bring them to life, the voice cast, because I don't think I've ever played a game with such an incredible voice cast. I truly don't.
People really like 16's acting, and it's good, but I've been on this stance since Remake. This is flat out the best JRPG dubcast I've ever experienced. Every scene funny ones are even funnier from the deliveries. The emotional ones, Barrett and Dine, need I say more on that? It's just so great. And it makes everything so lively. Even these small tertiary characters we were talking about have great acting.
Right. And that's the kind of stuff that really elevates these scenes in this story. Like, I think about, Cody, Britt, Brianna, Susie, John, Max, every single one of them. I mean, you talk about just even the smallest of moments, like Yuffie when they're in Gingaga teasing, or not even in Gingaga, in Coral Desert, teasing Cloud about having clones, right? I mean, you think about all this stuff, and it's like these tiny, even just side remarks. There's so much passion put into it, and I appreciate that so much as a player because it not only makes the game more enjoyable for me, but it makes my love and attachment to the characters so much higher than it ever could be without that incredible voice casting.
Rebirth is ultimately the sum of its parts, just everything interconnects. It's all these little details that make this game of the year for me. And that's just with what we've been talking about, the characters and plot and a bit of side content. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Yeah, I mean, with characters, there's so much that we could still talk about. I mean, dates, the gold saucer, just everything with that was mind-blowing. And the amount of effort from, development team, the different activities, recreating, you think about the original Final Fantasy VII and those scenes, and I'm just sitting here like, how did they create this with the visuals that we have now, and how did they come up with it in 1997? Because it just blows my mind.
Like, it's obscene. This game artistically strikes such a crazy balance for me. You get a touch of photorealism with the familiar anime aesthetic. Like, these monster designs are insane. There's so many good designs in this game, but it all works. And it doesn't forsake any of, the goofiness or silliness of the original. And that goes over to the mini games as well.
Oh, for sure. And I again was just so impressed with how they were able to translate these original, polygon designs of different enemies and turn them into these hyper realistic beasts and terrors that you fight. I mean, I think about so many of them that people were posting on Twitter, so excited to see, and just seeing them recreated, it just to be in the environment even is just crazy. And yeah, of course, mini games. I mean, oh my goodness, I was still am overwhelmed with how high of quality everything is and how many there are. And there's definitely people out there that did not like the mini games and were very adamant about that. And I understand, but I want to raise you one and say most of them were optional. And I definitely got frustrated. Pre-patch, Glide to Chocobo in Cosmo Canyon was miserable. It was absolutely miserable. That one, I wanted to break my controller in half. Beyond that, there were maybe a couple, but at the same time, I think that's the fun of it. There's so much and everything is such high quality. I mean, I remember being like, oh my gosh, why is there Fall Guys mini games as a frog in the middle of Under Junon? And that's still, it's just, you go through this game, you explore all these areas, and there's these random mini games. I mean, you think about the one in Gingaga, whenever you're going and getting ingredients, and there's a mushroom picking mini game for one quest, and it doesn't appear anywhere else. The level of dedication there is insane.
It really is just the little things in Rebirth. Just so many things are one-off. You can maybe go talk to an NPC and replay some of this. But so much of it is just here's the Shinra marching thing in the middle of the story. Oh, here when we reach Costa del Sol, one of the mini games is tied to Red 13. Let him actually have fun pretending to be the pet he's not.
Yeah, and he gets to play Rocket League.
It just all interconnects in such a beautiful way. And so many games just don't do that anymore. Here's the gameplay, here's the story.
Yeah,
And this is also an RPG, so it's boosted. You get these mechanics and numbers, like the relationship system. It just all just ties together.
yeah, and I think with your point about a lot of other games not doing this, you're absolutely right. Because I sit back still and I'm like, I cannot believe the level of quality. Like every side quest in Rebirth could have been in the main story and I would have been happy with it. Every minigame could have been not optional. I would have been okay with it. But they offer this entire map and it's like, yeah, you can go and play 40 hours worth of story and play to your heart's content. And when you're done, if you choose not to do side content along the way, you have another 60 hours of content awaiting you. And I think that there's definitely a loop, right? There is, there's different things in different regions to go do, right? With Chadley's intel, but at the same time, it's like everything was so unique and fun. And personally for me, just seeing that world recreated and exploring it was more than enough for me to invest the time and effort. And I didn't get tired of it once. I mean, I'm so excited for the PC release, and I'm probably going to play another 100 to 150 hours just on that to experience everything again.
Just the world. I like how it's not too big, but it's still such a grand size, and everything feels almost handcrafted, which you don't get in true open worlds these days, really. It's all tool generated for the most part. But everything just feels like it had that little touch. Like, even the side quests guide you around the world to places you might not have even checked out in a certain region.
Yeah, and I think I almost disagree with you because you were like, it's not that. Are you saying it's not that big or not too big?
It's not too
Okay,
big.
yeah, I would have been fine with it
Nothing
bigger.
like a Xenoblade 3, for example.
I would have even been fine with it being bigger, but I totally agree. I think it was the perfect size. But, I just think about the scale. I think about the moments in the game that I ran around, leaving Mithril Cave and seeing Junon for the first time and just seeing the high wind there with its propeller spinning. And you just sit there and you're looking up at this giant thing. I mean, it blew my mind. I think about that. I think about the fallen reactor in Gongaga.
You can even see Fort Condor in the background.
Yes.
With the big condor on top. Like, it's just... And what really sold the scale for me, I get giddy even now thinking about it, is when you get the tiny Bronco. All of this is so handcrafted with so much stuff in it, and it's all interconnected to one another.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it blows my mind, and I'm very hopeful that Part 3 is going to let us go back everywhere on the map, and there's going to be a couple new quests here and there and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize is, 90% of this world is interconnected. Certainly, with grasslands, you have to go through the Mithril Cave to get to Junon. But you think about like Corel Desert in Gongaga. I mean, you literally drive over the water and you're in Gongaga region. Like, that is mind-blowing. And it's crazy to think about. And, another scale moment for me, walking into Cosmo Canyon for the first time. I mean, oh my gosh.
That place is huge.
It's insane. And just climbing all the elevators and stuff. I mean, like, I was literally like, oh my gosh, playing. Because I was like, wow, like, that's one of my favorite moments in the original game is going into Cosmo Canyon and just getting, the whole scene with Bugenhagen and all the projection and everything. And just getting to see all that recreated with such passion and a vision. I mean, it's unreal. It really is. Rebirth does not feel real a lot of the time. And it's kind of, even now, like almost a year out, it's still kind of hard for me to put the words together. Like, yeah, this game is real. It came out and there's another one coming.
Another thing the scale really hits me on is the towns. These are big, realistically designed towns that still have all the landmarks you loved. And the NPCs, especially in places like Cosmo Canyon, deliver even more expansion. In one of my favorite NPC systems, I just love having that text log and you walk by people and you only talk to like important ones. You can get so much just from listening in onto conversations that you're not even part of.
Yeah, there's quite an interesting one in Cosmo Canyon, right?
Maybe you can check out a video.
Yeah, no, I totally agree though. I think the text log is really cool. It definitely, again, it's one of those things that really helped sell the immersion for me. And talking about the size of towns, yeah, obviously the ones that we have, but the team went even further from just recreating stuff, and we got brand new establishments and towns like Crow's Nest, right? And that place was pretty big, and it was super intricately crafted, and I don't know, it's just that kind of stuff, that extra mile that the developers have gone through is just incredible. It's really just remarkable.
And the map just still lines up with original FF7. What used to be just an overworld where you traveled to the different map spots is now fully fleshed out. You can find new monster types, you can find side quests, even mini games. It's just packed.
Yeah, and having Chadley be kind of the catalyst for receiving all the different things you can do in each region, I think was a great decision. I understand people feeling like, oh, this is a formulaic approach, but at the same time, again, I really do feel like that the Rebirth development team went above and beyond it, offering a bunch of new experiences. Like, sure, there were definitely areas where, okay, go chase after the colored bird, climb up, try to find
Go
the
to
live
the
stream.
tower.
Right. But at the same time, think about the tower segments. I think about like Gengaga's, right? You had to use a chocobo to get to almost every single one of them. Like, you couldn't just run up to it. In the grasslands, you started out, okay, I gotta run up to it. I gotta do this. Junon, there were a couple you had to climb up walls for. I mean, there's different things in each region, and chocobos, right? There were a different chocobo in each region that had a different gimmick, and all of the stuff you could do in that region was centered around those gimmicks. And like, okay, this region has different things, and you've got to learn how to work around that. And again, it just sells the world being alive. There's all kinds of different places in this world that have all sorts of different things, but at the same time, it's one planet. And so many games have a hard time realizing that. Like, you'll go to town A and town B, and it's like, wow, this is really cool, like, great. But the hard part is this is a different piece of the same world, right? And I think that's really where Rebirth excelled.
A lot of games typically just these days focus on, oh, here's this country, here's this big city, etc. Rebirth doesn't do that. Each region has its own unique culture and place in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely much prefer this, not to throw shade, but to certain games that just give you 3 giant continents to explore. I will leave that unnamed. But I mean, the culture aspect is super evident. I mean, just walking around, even seeing, different regions, people have different jobs, they could do different things in their cities. There's different architecture, different environments, enemies, I mean, everything. And it's that kind of thing that, again, I think really helped propel the story in keeping the idea that, okay, we're just going to point A to point B, like, out of everyone's heads. Because like you said, like, they really turned it into like a journey instead of just like, hey, we've got to get and follow Sephiroth and we end up here. Okay, let's do this. Now we're moving here.
It's a journey with these just amazing characters. And also want to mention on some of the world stuff, it's that trickle down again. The RPG mechanics prop any weakness I'd have over a normal open world game or open world shaped game. Because yes, you may be doing these towers and fighting monsters, but at the end of the day, you're doing that and getting rewarded for it. You're getting something like a summon materia. You're getting materia that can completely change a build for a character. It just all ties together. Its mechanics prop up the world, which prop up the story, which props up the characters.
Yeah, and that weaving together of all these elements, I think, is again what makes this game of the year. Because there's games this year, and like, let's be real, there's definitely games this year that had better elements here or there, but this is the complete package. And at the end of the day, for me at least, Game of the Year is the game that resonated the most with me, that I had the most fun with, and that overall offered the best experience. And that was undoubtedly Rebirth. I mean, with the story, the characters, the world just interweaving with one another in every aspect. And again, like we mentioned, the combat, synergy, everything else. Like, you have all these different elements that merge together as one, creating not a game, but an experience. And that's the distinction there that really gives it the nod for me.
The thing about it feeling like an experience is, if it didn't interweave like this, it wouldn't work. This does feel like a journey. You're doing unique things at every turn, even if it's familiar, like climbing a tower. The mushroom minigame, this is how you make memories. It's an experience because at every turn, you're fighting new enemies, you're seeing new story, you're growing closer to these characters. This is a true journey, almost like a life experience in a way. Just everything connects. It feels complete. When we're in this era of like almost everything feeling half measured or incomplete, like, oh, they clearly had to do this is clearly not handcrafted, so on and so forth. But Rebirth just defies like the modern AAA structure of games for me.
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I will say one thing I do want to mention with the world. We talked about it being an open world, which, like you just said, that's been, I think, a shortcoming for a lot of games, is choosing to make an open world experience. Because at the end of the day, you've got to be able to build around that. And I think a lot of games fail and would have been better off as linear, right? But the thing that with Rebirth that really sells it with this open world is, again, the developers give it purpose. Like, we have a reason for going through an open world. We're trying to find the Black Ropes. We're trying to find Sephiroth. And that reason that drives us through each of these areas really gives purpose to the reason that it's open. I mean, and I think that's what a lot of games fall short in. I've played all kinds of games where I'm like, wow, I really wish that this section was linear, because having it so open kind of killed my immersion, because we just have a bunch of empty fields, and I don't want to talk about other Final Fantasy games, but I definitely had moments like that in 15. I love 15, but I definitely have moments in 15 where I'm like, I wish that this was linear and not so open world. But at the same time, I think Rebirth took what the approach was in 15, like making a purposeful open world, and delivered it. And we have a world that is handcrafted, that every corner has a reason to be explored, and it's just fun. It's fun to go through. It's full of life. There's not a bunch of dull, empty fields. Like, even the grasslands, which are, like the name implies, lands of grass, right? There's hills, there's pipes of Calm and Mako, there's ruins, there's all kinds of stuff to explore. I mean, you have that random hut with Queen's blood. There's just everything there that you could ever want to be engaged and stay engaged. And that's really where the development team succeeded.
It's this element of fun that just sells this world for me. That's a problem with FF16 for me. You don't get to see these different sides of these characters because they only stick to this one tone. FF7's not afraid to get weird or emotional just from a side quest.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned Broden, the innkeeper at Calm earlier. I mean, he's this nice guy who helps out, gives you the tools, and you go down through the bunker to exit the grasslands, and you find out that he disappeared. And long story short, side quest helping someone that knows him at a windmill, you find out that he was a former soldier and was going through degradation, and we see him in a black robe at the end of it, of a string of side quests. And it's like, wow, like, that's a heavy topic, because if you're familiar with the soldier process, like what that degradation means, and the fact that, like, you essentially just lose all will, right? And I think that that's so interesting to be able to incorporate elements like that. And then, moments of Costa del Sol, Tifa and Aerith walking down, and Cloud's like, oh, sunscreen. Oh, wait, what? And it's, the balance there is great. And I think that so many games fail to balance that written structure, but Rebirth did it in stride, and it offered like every emotion. I probably went through emotions that aren't even in the dictionary. Like, it offered everything.
That's what makes it feel like an experience. And what's crazy is you don't even have to engage with so much of this. But if you do, you're rewarded Gameplay wise, you get new items, experience, yada, but you also get a satisfying story. And a lot of side quests also have like a designated party member partner where they're going along this quest with Cloud for their own personal reasons or curiosity.
That was a really interesting choice from the development team, but I'm so glad they did it because there were a lot of cutscenes that I now associate with certain characters that were from those specific kind of side quests, right? One of the ones, the Condor quest with Tifa and Cloud, and just, bridging out their pasts and their relationship as it evolves. But you have this really nice moment where you're like helping out this old man in a wheelchair to see the Condor. And, there's plenty of examples like that. I mean, even the Cactar quests in
I was about to bring that one up.
Cosmo Canyon, like just seeing Yuffie and Red 13 and Cloud in the Cactar pose is just so funny. And
And pairing up like this straight man Cloud with Red exhibiting his, kiddier side because he is younger, and then with Yuffie, so they stick Cloud with the two characters that are enjoying this moment more, and he's just stone-faced, like, get this over with. It creates fun dynamics, too.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I think it's just hilarious, the stuff that happens in this game that, is not even part of the main story. And to your point about, so much of this being optional, I really think that's the crazy part because, it would be one thing if we're like, yeah, to really get the full experience, you need to play through all of the stuff the game has to offer. But I think the development team balanced all of that into the main story. So regardless of what you choose, whether you do just main story and some side content, or, main story, all side content, platinum, whatever, you're getting an amazing experience that's balanced and has all of these amazing moments. And I think that's really special.
And like, not all of it is 100% perfect or 100% fun, like you mentioned, but that's all part of like an experience. Because for me, having like these side quests specifically structured with having like a partner, that almost is like a IRL in real life side quest, like people say they go on. It's just you and a buddy doing something. That makes it feel like a journey.
Yeah, and it's definitely where the personable aspect comes in, I think. But really, again, it's just remarkable everything that this game accomplished and offered. And for me, kind of one of the behind the scenes for some, but for me, it's like the top of my list. The thing that really just did it all for me in the game was the music. And I mean, the fact that there are 400 tracks of music in this game is legitimately insane. I have never heard of anything like that for almost any game. I mean, there are some, but on the scale of what they did in this game, it is unreal. The music is all incredible. There's 18 composers on the project. Obviously, Suzuki and Hamazu were the ones to lead the project, but, obviously composers like Yoshitaka Suzuki and Shotaro Shima obviously participated. And I mean, my goodness, man, the music and the mixes and everything that was incorporated into Rebirth is mind-blowing. And I listen to the soundtrack every day still, and I probably will for the rest of my life.
It's just, you don't get soundtracks like this these days, really. Every region uses the leitmotif of the classic overworld theme remixed to the culture's instruments or like the vibe of the area. So that's already a nice touch. Every area, dungeon, has a theme that seamlessly swaps to a battle remix of that theme. It's just seamless. It swaps out. And then cutscenes. Just so many new mixes for classic songs. Like, in the original FF7, you would have these memorable themes, but this just seamlessly incorporates them, like especially those ending cutscenes. You're getting themes of Aerith and Sephiroth, just interweaving between cutscenes, shots, moments. Just craft through and through.
Yeah, and on your mention of cutscenes, it's still crazy to me that there are so many tracks that have not been officially released because they're gonna probably come in the original soundtrack plus. But I think about scenes like Tifa and Cloud's talk at the top of the Calm Hotel in Chapter 1. That's a literally just used for that cutscene. And then, I mean, there's so many examples, but there's so many different tracks of music that are just crafted for one cutscene or side quest. Obviously, everyone's favorite, the Stamp song, right? I mean, think about all that and all the effort that
You
went into
can't
everything.
forget Kyrie's song either.
Right, right. I mean, you just have to sit back and like think about how much effort just really went into each aspect of this game, and once again, just culminated into game of the year.
It's just something beautiful that you don't get to experience all the time for me. I like so many different games for different reasons, but hardly any will strike a chord quite like this. This is just everything. It's everything you could want or need. It's even what you don't want or need at times. It just has anything and everything. It's such a complete package that feels completely authored the whole way through. Not a thing in the game feels like it wasn't meant to be there.
And, I think so much of that not only was a joy to experience for us as fans, but you can just feel the passion behind every developer, voice actor, anyone who worked on this game. There was such a level of passion, and it's so clear when you play it. Just everything is bursting with joy.
Even the development team trickles down. We have people who've been at Square for 30 years. Kitase, Nomura, Nojima, Toriyama. I think Toriyama is not quite that long, but the point is, like, we have all of our veterans that we love still creating and working on this stuff. But then we have the next generation, like the co-director, Hamaguchi. And just the passion that their, like, superiors have had for this franchise for so long, it's very clearly part of the younger staff too. And they're what's keeping this alive ultimately.
Yeah, and I had an incredible opportunity around the Game Awards to meet Kitase-san and Hamaguchi-san at the Square Enix offices. And I mean, oh my gosh, Hamaguchi-san was just so excited, and you could just tell how much passion that he has for Final Fantasy VII and just Final Fantasy in general. He lives and breathes it. And of course, Kitase-san, same thing. I mean, it's crazy to me. I was thinking about this a couple of weeks ago. Kitase-san, by the end of it, and Nomura-san, both of them will have worked on this project, and pretty much, all the big names. I could go on, but all of these people will have worked on this project for about 15 years once Part 3 is out, give or take. And I sit back and think, like, 15 years of your life dedicated to this, in addition to the original game for a lot of these developers. And
they're doing it wholeheartedly. They want to do it. They need to do it as creatives.
Right, and I think back to the interview that Nomura-san gave years ago, where he was like, if we didn't do the remake, someone else was going to, so we buckled down and did it. And the fact that it's still going, we still have another part, but I don't want to say I thought it was impossible, but I think it's just, again, incredible that they have managed to elevate the original game. And you just, we've seen remakes that have elevated original games, the Resident Evil remakes, some others, but this is different, and it's really special. It really is.
To think it's this special to us as fans, and I guarantee every single person on that dev team is a fan too. You can tell. You just don't see games made with this level of love. Even crazier, 3 years. 3 years. You can only do that with passion.
Yeah, it's actually insane looking at some of the development timelines for a lot of teams and games out there. and you think that this game was fully developed in 3 years. They spent 1 year after remake on intermission and intergrade, and 3 years on rebirth. And that just blew my mind when I heard it. I was like, how? And the answer's there. It's right in front of you. Like, number one, they kept the development structure and retained all of the team, continued working on it. There wasn't any shifts besides Hamaguchi being the sole director and Nomura moving to creative director. But, number two, obviously you have assets being reused. We see RGG Studio with Like a Dragon do that. And look how many games. I mean, oh my gosh, like I didn't think it was going to end at the Game Awards. There was just Virtua Fighter, Project Century. I'm like, what's next? Next Yakuza game after Pirate? I was like, what's going on?
New games on top of their biggest game of the year being nominated for countless awards.
And yeah.
That should tell the industry something.
Oh, it has to tell the industry something. And, I am still under the belief that Part 3 is going to come out in 2027. And if it does, we got, not granted, that doesn't include development time for Remake, but we got Remake, DLC for Remake, Rebirth, and Part 3 within 7 years. I mean, who else in the industry is doing that? And again, you look at the stats, you look at the facts. They retained their team, they reused assets, and again, with Rebirth, they have built a base for the future. I mean, we probably will do a whole video about it at some point, but Final Fantasy VII Rebirth should be the blueprint for Final Fantasy XVII. It should be. Like, there's no question about it. The battle system, the combination of ATB, I mean, again, you have the perfect picture of what the future of Final Fantasy needs to build on. And I mean, it's crazy that was done in 3 years. It blows my mind, especially in the current landscape and how the games industry looks right now,
It's just insane. You just do not see games like this. And yeah, it's building upon stuff they've already had. But even taking Remake's dev timeline into account, they moved that internal at one point. They just basically scrapped everything CyberConnect had done in like 2015, presumably maybe some of 14. All that was pretty much scrapped. So even Remake had to be built back up again in like 3 years. No, not a single other AAA studio is going to be delivering you a full trilogy with this much stuff, this much passion, and in that timeline. I mean, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League took it, 8 or 9 years? It took as long to develop that one game as it did for the entire Arkham trilogy beforehand, last generation.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of this is just industry norms and habits that are driving this. But yeah, I mean, to your point, CyberConnect 2 originally was developing the game. In May of 2017, it was announced that they were moving it internal. Granted, it probably happened a few months before that, but still, I mean, it's 3 years. The game Remake came out in April 10th, 2020. I mean, it's unbelievable the timeline that they've had. And again, that's what you get when you mix passion, smart reuse of assets, and again, keeping the same team and retaining teams. We see a lot of teams and studios nowadays like firing a lot of staff, laying off staff, and changing up your team so much on these big projects is only going to set you back on the timeline. And that's just the reason that we've got Rebirth already. I mean, if Square did not adopt those strategies, we would not be playing we would not be saying Rebirth was game of the year right now.
All I can say is that team learned from the struggles and woes of FF13 and Versus 13.
Yeah, well, step number 1 was not using Crystal tools and using Unreal Engine 4.
But they've planned this out so well, and everything's coming out. Everything's of an obscene high quality. When's Naughty Dog's next game coming out? We don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, considering they didn't date that one at the Game Awards, it's definitely, not definitely, but it's pretty likely it's not next year. And so at bare minimum, that puts them out at 2026. But hey, maybe we'll get The Last of Us Part 2 remake before then, hopefully. But
the remaster wasn't enough.
No, of course not. But hey, moving on, I think the last thing that obviously I think we need to touch on, granted, saying it's game of the year and everything, some people will bring up is sales. And, before we dive into this, I want to say, sales aren't everything. There's a lot of reasons for why the game, quote, underperformed or whatever. And to be fair, Square did not say Final Fantasy VII Rebirth underperformed. They said their HD games division underperformed, right? So I think that that's something important to keep in mind. There's a lot of misinformation out there with the sales of this game. And to be honest, I think just people going online saying it sold bad, it was, didn't sell well. I definitely think that leans towards misinformation. I think estimates around launch were 2.3 or 2.5 million copies. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was, I would say it's probably for sure above 3 at this point. If that is to be believed, of course, and probably closer to 3.5. But obviously we have the PC release coming up. That's going to give more sales. But in reality, the reason, there's a lot, right? There's a lot of reasons that you
so
can
many
point
people
to.
take stuff out of context too.
Yes,
Like
yes.
Remake came out in 2020, height of COVID, which was the height of spending for games.
Absolutely.
It also came out on the PS4 at the end of its console life. That's when it has the most sales and biggest user base. And PS5 has not reached those levels. There's all sorts of small details that culminate to Rebirth didn't meet expectations apparently, which that's not even the full truth. It's just all these wires getting crossed.
Right. And obviously Square hasn't come out and said, hey, it sold this many copies, which I think you can take as a sign it didn't sell what they wanted it to, which is fair. But again, there is definitely a lot of misinformation out there. And to your point, yeah, I think PlayStation 5, the exclusivity, the contract for that, absolutely affected it. If you had Rebirth launch on PC alongside PlayStation 5, I think you would have sold twice as many copies. I truly do. Especially with the amount of hype and the reviews and everything around launch. And you take that even further, you launch on Xbox, and it's not launching on Switch. There's no way, unless you want a cloud version, and we're not doing that again, please.
No, but it makes sense. Cloud's cloud version.
No, we're not doing. I cannot do the Kingdom Hearts cloud crap again. Please no. But you think about like, hey, Switch 2. So I'm more looking at Part 3. Like Part 3, this game should be on. Part 3 should launch on every system, and I think you're gonna have a completely different picture, because at the end of the day, yeah, Sony can say, hey guys, we have a Spider-Man game. It's coming out here, boom. It's gonna sell a lot of copies. Sure, it's Spider-Man. It's a licensed IP. Final Fantasy is one of the, it's one of the biggest RPG series out there. But at the same time, there's no denying, and it really, again, starts with Final Fantasy 13 and Fabula Nova Crystallis. But there's so much stuff that happened at Square that I think has caused people to perceive that Final Fantasy has an identity crisis. And there's definitely some merit to that. But again, I think you have to look at, there are probably, I would say, at least 10 factors that played into why Rebirth could have sold better. And at the end of the day, yeah, it didn't happen, assumedly, right? But I still think regardless, if you hold sales as a weight for deciding your game of the year, why are you
playing games?
I don't understand that, because like for me, oh my gosh, I was putting together my top 10 list for the year the other day, and I've got a couple games on there that are so small that have like 500 reviews on Steam. And it's like, I don't care how many copies it sold. Why should I care? I care that it was fun and I had a good time with it. And I think that overall, just review culture, game culture, everything, it's so just, it is.
It prevents people from enjoying things for reasons that shouldn't matter.
Right. And I think it's just so targeted nowadays. Like there has to be, you have to have something to compare it to. It has to be better than this. It has to be better than that. But at the end of the day, like, I encourage you to ask yourself, like, did I enjoy this? Great. Then you enjoyed it. You shouldn't care whether someone disagrees with you on your game of the year or this or that, because at the end of the day, it's like, it's your opinion, you know? And I think that's just something in society that's happened with especially games right now. But at the end of the day, you know, sales really don't matter to you as a player. You should just enjoy things for what they are. And hey, if FF7 Rebirth is your game of the year, that's awesome. That's great. If you hated the game, that's also fine. I mean, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But I just think it's interesting that so many people hold so much weight in sales, you know? Like, I don't care that a game sold 12 million copies. Does that make it game of the year? Does it? I mean, I don't think so, but maybe some people do.
Not for me. And so many of the Game of the Year contenders, like, if we're putting stock in the TGAs like that, so many of those contenders, or even just nominees for other categories, are in the same ballpark as sales, if not less, than FF7 Rebirth. The quantity they sold doesn't speak to you as a person. Just try games, play games, enjoy what you like.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Obviously, like Wukong sold what, like 20 million units? Sure, Airtree sold a bunch. I don't have the number on top of my head, but you know, Metaphor, as we know, the latest sales update was 1 million copies. So does that disqualify Metaphor? I mean, you know, there's a lot I think that people need to reassess and realize that A, awards aren't everything, and B, you know what, like everyone has their own opinion, and I think that's great. I think that's the best part about YouTube and media and everything, is that there's so many diverse opinions, and it should provoke all sorts of positive discussion, because at the end of the day, every year, for the most part, because there are some that have been not great, but every year has been great for games, right? There's always so many great games that release, and for me, it's always super fascinating and interesting to talk with different people. And, you know, I pick up games, I'm like, oh, I didn't even know about that. Let me try that, add it to my wish list. And, you know, I think that's cool. But yeah, man, I don't know. I think sales, A, don't really matter, and B, also there's a lot of misinformation out there with Rebirth.
It's just, think of how many impactful games haven't sold as much as something like even Luigi's Mansion 3. I haven't met a single person that's played that game, but there's like 10 million plus sales for it. Then we have Metroid over here that has like, 7 million series sales? And so many people know Metroid. Or even Banjo and Kazooie. They sold maybe 3 mil in their heyday? But who wasn't hyped for that in Smash?
Oh, for sure. And yeah, like on your topic of Luigi's Mansion 3, I always crack up because I'm like, people are like, oh my gosh, it sold 5 million copies, or Spider-Man sold 10. And then I'm like, did it outsell Luigi's Mansion 3? Because it's over 14 million copies, which is crazy. But yeah, no, beyond the point with sales and stuff like that, wrapping it up. I mean, Payne, like, I don't know. Why is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth your game of the year? I know we've been talking about it for the last hour, but, you know, let's reel it in and kind of, I don't know, give it an overview.
Like, I've been a Final Fantasy fan for a long time. FF4 is what really got me into the series. And for its time, just the way it incorporated story and gameplay, it was like the first big RPG where they're talking during battles at points. Characters like Rydia don't learn fire until she overcomes her trauma with her village burning down and losing her mother. Just these things interwove and made the game better, and Rebirth does the same thing. And I don't think a FF has done that for a long time for me. Just everything just plays on one another, and this is the biggest and best Final Fantasy has been. And I still love every single one of the main series entries and a bunch of spin-offs. But Rebirth really is a cut above the rest.
Yeah, well said. I mean, yeah, for me personally, again, I said it at the beginning. I had sky high expectations for this game. I mean, my goodness, you would think I was crazy. You would absolutely think I was crazy. But at the same time, they were all surpassed. And, you know, before Rebirth, my favorite game of all time before Rebirth was Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I adore that game. But after I played Rebirth, that is really what moved Final Fantasy VII to 1 for me. It was my second favorite game before that. And, you know, I tell people all the time, and I said it in my review at the very end, like, I don't think Rebirth was just my game of the year. I genuinely believe it is one of the most impressive and best games ever made. I truly do. And I seriously cannot wait for part 3 because I know it's going to surpass it. And I'm going to look at myself in this video and be like, wow, like this was the best game ever? No, this is the best game ever. And, it's really cool. I'm so happy that we have another game to look forward to. And we're seriously so fortunate to be in the position we are with the remake trilogy, right? Because for a lot of games, this would be okay, great, like that's the game, it's over. But the fact that this is now a 120-hour RPG experience is just so amazing. And goodness, man, I cannot wait for part 3. I really can't.
Even if it was almost exactly like Rebirth, that's still some top 10 of all time material. But it's not just going to be Rebirth. We already know this. If they could make a jump that big from remake to Rebirth, just imagine the airship in part 3 are all the most iconic story moments from the back half.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, dude. One of my favorite scenes of all time is the live stream scene. And I'm so excited because it's going to be elevated. I just know it. And with everything that's already happened. And, that's the beauty of what they've done with this project. It's interweaving all of these pieces of FF7, bringing in the new stuff, bringing in new vision, and just throwing it out there in the world. And obviously, I'm super grateful for it. It's seriously one of the best decisions I ever made to play Final Fantasy, because I'm so happy that now here I am years and years later getting to experience games like this. And, all I can say is I really hope that the PC release for Rebirth and everything else leading up to part 3 brings more and more people in, because this is really just one of the most special games I think that's been out there ever. I really do.
This truly is some peak Final Fantasy for me. Already loved Remake, and Rebirth just gave me not just more of Remake, but things I never knew I wanted or needed. This is what a modern RPG really should be. Needs to lean into just making everything a satisfying package. You have your side content that you don't even have to do. You might not even know about some of it. You get a main story that gets you emotionally invested, and characters that you'll sit and think about or relate to for days on end, if not forever. It's a journey that touches you every step of the way.
It really is. And, it's these kind of games that make us sit down and make videos for this series, and it's going to be going until part 3. So I hope y'all are strapped in, because goodness, you do not want to see our ideas doc. It is way too loaded with everything right now.
Even outside of the ideas doc, just DMs and just what's in our brains, there's just too much FF7. It can barely be contained, so it's leaking out on YouTube now.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And, to say definitively, yes, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is our game of the year, if it hasn't been said enough or talked about enough in this video. But I want to thank you so much for watching. This is episode 12 of Under the Plate, and we've been running since the end of August, and it's kind of crazy. But we've got all sorts of things planned for next year. We seriously hope you stick around. Feel free to drop a subscribe and keep up with the latest on the series. And trust me when I say it, Final Weapon has so much planned for 2025, and we seriously hope you stick around. So thank you so much again for watching, and we'll catch you next time.